everyone, welcome to another painting tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we're going to be painting Mulgoth the Cleaver from the Darkwater Warhammer Quest new game that's just come out. I keep saying this, I think with every tutorial for these Darkwater models. These is my favourite one, but this guy might be my favourite. Yeah, especially with this paint scheme we're going to do on him, which is something a bit different to the box art. So first off, what I've done is I've primed the model in Vallejo black primer. I've then base coated the entire model with AK Tenebrous Grey, but you could use the Citadel Corvus Black. It's just a very dark, not quite black. It gives a nice shadow colour that's not just always black. Then what we're doing now is just some dry brushing. So first off, we're going to be dry brushing in sort of a dark silver. I'm using AK Gunmetal, but Lead Boucher or Iron Warriors from the Citadel range will be good. And we're just doing a rough dry brush, making sure we're picking out all of the edges, any areas that you want to be slightly brighter. Our aim here is to get a good sort of coverage of a base coat of silver whilst maintaining those deepest recesses and shadows. But dry brushing also allows us to add scratches and marks and just wear and tear that is quite obvious on these Nurgle models. And we're only going to dry brush this one neutral sort of silver colour, and then we're going to start adding some shades on top. So first off, I'm going to use a Citadel Athonian Camoshade, which is a nice dark brownish green, nice colour for Nurgle. And we're very simply just going to apply this all over the metallic areas and just abide by the same rules you do with washes. Obviously you've got to put it on there quite heavy, but don't let it pool anywhere, otherwise you'll leave nasty blotches, which is hard to paint over. But just make sure you get it into all the nooks and crannies, all those recesses. We are going to be hitting this with a lot of different colours and shades, but this green will always last through, even though no matter how heavy we hit it with some other colours, this green is always there. We're going to intensify it later by adding another colour on top. give it a good 10-15 minutes to dry. Then once it's dry, you could add another layer on top of that if you wanted to, but I was quite happy with the one layer. We're just going to add in some brass copper colours now. So we're just going to be using a couple of Citadel colours. So the first one is Brass Scorpion, and I'm just going to pick out a little bit of trim, the fly that's on his chest plate. There's a couple of flies on his legs as well, and then we're just going to do a little highlight with Sycorax bronze afterwards. There's some trim around the model, so the bottom of his chest plate, as I said, the flies around the back, and there's a couple of flies on his legs. When adding the highlights with the Sycorax bronze, I'm not just doing simple edges, I'm doing little lines and scratches here and there, little dots and scrapes, just inferring a little bit more wear and tear. Okay, we're now just going to bring back some highlights on the silver. So I'm using some AK Natural Steel, which is Stormhull Silver, and then a little bit of the gunmetal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the gunmetal first, so that was your neutral silver colour. I'm just going to do a little bit of edge highlighting, again, little scratches, dots, not just straightforward straight lines, and then dotting the paint in those highlighted areas just to increase the intensity of the brightness in some of those areas. And like I said, we are going to be covering this again in some rusty colours, so a little bit like Bob Ross, some of this stuff is going to be hidden, some of it will be shown, but we know it's there, and it all adds to the texture and overall look of the model. So just work yourself around, add in the highlights where you want to put them, but the sculpt is so good. It shows it all so very clearly where the detail and damage and wear and tear is. So you can just highlight that. Little lines, scratches and dots here and there. Especially in those areas you want to be a bit brighter. And then do the same with the brighter silver colour, but in just smaller areas. Not so much on the brush, slightly thinned down, just so that the paint blends a bit better than big splotches. The next step is a big one, and it seems a bit scary, but it's going to really work out, and it's kind of a cheats way of doing rust. So we're going to be using the Dirty Down Rust water soluble paint. It's absolutely fantastic tool to have in your arsenal. It saves doing a bunch of washes and pigments and all sorts of stuff, and I find you get a really good effect with it. Give the bottle a really good shake. Open your window, because this stuff is a little bit stinky even though it is water based. Put some into a little mixer and add a couple of drops to water, because water activates this. It gives a much more rustier feel. So that's probably 5 or 6 drops, and it's probably a 50-50 mix actually of this of water and the rust mixture. And now all I'm doing is I'm splodging this all over the green armour, much like you would do a dirty wash. That's the same principles here. Just remembering, generally the bigger the splodge is where most of your yellow orangey rust is going to be shown. If you're unsure of how this stuff is going to work, get a tester model if you've got one, an old space marine or an old bit of terrain or something, and just use it, add a little bit of water and play about with it to see what effects you can get. I've used this a few times now, so I'm used to sort of how it's working, but sometimes it adds the rust effect to areas you weren't quite expecting. Now it does look as if we're losing a lot of our greenness. It's sort of going a browny, yellowy orange colour, but when this dries back, that green is going to be intensified alongside our rust. Now this does take 10, 15, 20 minutes to dry. Sometimes it might be even wise leaving it for an hour, just whilst it dries, but as it dries the rustness intensifies. If this is a step too far and you wanted to have a bit more control about your rust effects, then there's a few colours you can use. If you're using the AK range, then AK medium rust and AK light rust built into washes, progressively getting lighter, is really good. Citadel range, you've got your sort of Doomball browns and your Mormfang browns, your Scrag browns, and then your sort of Troll Slayer orange. They're your really good colours to do some dirty rusty effects. If you wanted to add a verdigris on the copper and brass or gold if you've got it, then just a very light blue, Behemoth blue I think it is on the Citadel range, really light blue, Arctic green from the Fanatics range, and there's a Vallejo blue green as well which you can use, but yeah, just any very very light greenish blue is what you're looking for verdigris. So there we go, I've added it all over the miniature, and now we're just going to leave it to dry. So I've come back after a few minutes. It's still not completely dry, but you can see we're sort of halfway through the process now, and it's all ready to start adding some really good effects. As we're about halfway through, as a majority of it is dried, I'm going to start just carrying on the painting a little bit. And for this I'm just going to be doing a very dark black leather. So we're going to base coat in Corvus Black, and then use Skaven Blight Dinge, Storm Vermin Fur, and then we're going to use Kislev Flesh as just a little bit of a mixed paint just to get a lighter tone. So yeah, Corvus Black is a really nice dark greyish purplish black colour. So it's a good base coat if you don't want to use black. So just base coat all of your leather in your Corvus Black, then use the Skaven Blight Dinge as your first highlight colour, picking out all those raised areas and cracks and blemishes. Then the Storm Vermin Fur is your second highlight, so just pick out edge highlights and any edges and cracks. And then the Kislev Flesh mix in with the Storm Vermin Fur just to create a very sort of spot final scratch highlight, and you'll get a nice dark material, kind of dark leathery. I didn't want to go brown leather as there's a lot of browns on this model and they would have blended in a bit too much. I wanted to have a little bit of separation in some of those colours. Now that the dirty down rust is pretty much dry, I've got some of the bright silver, so I've got that natural steel, but yeah, Stormhold silver, and now I'm just doing some spot highlights, little scratches, little lines and marks, just to show as our final highlight of the armour, a little bit like we did initially where we added our final stage highlight, but now we're doing even smaller sections and little dots, little scratches, little marks, not too much, just to show that there is metal underneath all of that rust where the rust has either worn through or rubbed off. I've also gone around and just base coated all of the areas we haven't painted again in our really dark Tenebrous Grey, or as I said, you could use Corvus Black or just a standard black, just to base coat all of those, just to get rid of all that dry brushing stuff we had going over. And if you've made a mess with your washes or your rust stuff, you can clean that up as well. And that's the armour done. We're now going to move on to the skin tones. So what I'm going to do first of all is base coat all of the skin in AK Black Red, which is a bit of a corn red if you were using a Citadel range. So what I was going for here was a reddish brown skin, very dark, but with an intense orangey red highlight in the sort of scar spiral that he's got, that matched what we're doing with his axe as well, his cleaver. Obviously this was Nurgle, so it could have been green, or a dirty sort of pinkish colour, but I wanted to do something different. I wanted a very grim dark feel to these guys, to Mulgoth and his little buddies, so hence going very dark on the skin. So yeah, base coat of black red is a nice starting colour for our effects that we want to do. Just the one coat is really all that's needed. If you've thinned it down a bit too much, you can apply 2 coats. So then what I've done is I've made a wash of Corvus Black. You could just use Nuln Oil, but I had some Corvus Black on the wet palette still. So just make a wash of Corvus Black and then just go all over the model, the flesh, with that wash. Or you could use your Nuln Oil, or you could use your Ryken Flesh Shade. Anything that will just tone down the colour and add some darkness into the deepest parts, the recesses of the flesh. Whilst that wash is drying, I'm actually now going to paint the little horns from his noggin. So I've got AK Leather Brown, AK Beast Brown, and AK Saddle Brown. Just woodish tones, just to add just some highlights, not too much. There's almost dry brushed with those 3 colours, just 3 different tones, just to add some contrast and flavour to the wood. Once they're all dry, I then do a slight wash of that Corvus Black wash into the recesses, so from about 5mm from his head, glazed back into the head, just so you add a bit of darkness going from the sort of bark tree bits from his head into his actual helmet area. So once that wash on the skin is pretty much fully dry, I then am now gonna just start base coating back in that black red colour, leaving the recesses with the wash. So what we're doing is picking out the raised areas, picking out any bumps and any ridges. So pretty much covering, I'd say, about 90% of the skin, just leaving the darkest skin in the recesses and shadows. You'll notice when I get to the top, I'm almost painting on striations like the muscles over the tops of the arms. It's very subtle, but the eye does pick out the direction of paint stroke sometimes. So over muscles you sometimes get that sort of curved line striations where they're stretched. So that's what I try and evoke when I'm painting the miniatures, if there's large muscle areas to paint. This is basically bringing it back so that we've got that intense black-red colour on the raised parts, and the black-red with the wash is left in the recesses. We're now entering the stages of where I was making it up as I went along to see what we could kind of get. So I'm going to be using a few colours. The first one will be the AK Beast Brown. I'm also going to be using some medium rust from AK, and some AK light rust, and some AK decomposed flesh. Now we're going to be doing mixes here and there with these colours to get brighter and brighter skin tones on Mulgoth. First of all, we're going to be using Beast Brown, and just as I'm about to add it, I suddenly realise I need to add a little bit of water to it, because otherwise it'll be a bit too intense. As soon as I put it on there, I notice it's going to be quite bright. So I add just a little drop of water into that Beast Brown. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing a highlight of all the raised areas of the model. So wherever there's a bit of raised muscle, a bulbous spot or a knuckle, just painting that up in the Beast Brown. With a little bit of water added to it, you'll get a very natural sort of blend from our black red to the Beast Brown. we're now going to do exactly the same process but with medium rust from AK. Again, add a little drop of water and smaller highlight than before. Pick out all those raised areas with the medium rust. And with that medium rust, just do a 50 fit. This is probably a 60-40 of medium rust and decomposed flesh. If you haven't got decomposed flesh, then Kislev flesh or pallid witch flesh will be okay. But what we're sort of doing here is we're making a mix with the medium rust. We're adding a skin tone in with it, so that the medium rust itself turns into a skin tone, so that we get this is our main highlight colour that we're going to be doing now, where I'm adding little lines here which are sort of veins and ridges of all the muscle areas, and picking out all the little bulbous areas that are on the skin. So the medium rust colour mixed with a little bit of a flesh tone makes a nice highlight flesh tone colour, still sticking with our orangey red brown skin that we wanted to go for. It's a good tip if you wanted to paint blue skin, then get your blue colours and just add flesh colours to them, and you'll naturally get flesh tones as you're painting all those different blues. So just work around like I am now, just picking out anything you want to highlight, any major areas in this sort of intermediary highlight colour. So on this second highlight, all I've done is I've added a bit more of the decomposed flesh into the mix. So I'm probably at a 70-30 in favour of the decomposed flesh to medium rust. I actually don't use the light rust on the skin tones. So the skin composes of the black red, the beast brown and the medium rust plus decomposed flesh mixes to get smaller and smaller but brighter highlights. I never fully go to a pure decomposed flesh. There's always a little bit of medium rust mixed in with it. So as you can see though, our highlights are getting brighter and brighter now, picking out the little spots, pustules that are around his flesh. So the idea really here is that we wanted to have a nice, bright and intense spiral that's almost like lava, as it were, in a way, coming out from his arm, and that glow is emanating through his skin, causing cracks and rips and tears. But like lava, you'll have hot spots and cold spots. So to make it simpler, I'm thinking about the core of the spiral is the hottest point, and it's getting progressively cooler as we go. So bright is hot, cool is dark. So what I'm doing here is just around the edge with a pure decomposed flesh with a little bit of water in it. It's just adding little scratches, marks and lines, which will be the base of our fluorescent colours a little bit later on, and adds just a little bit of texture, a little bit of crackling effects for our lava that we're going to be adding by adding oranges and reds, and very, very dark, the Tenebrous Grey or Corvus Black that we'll be adding a little bit later to really sell the heat coming from his arm, as well as the coldness that the heat has caused, where it's burnt the skin almost to a crisp. Okay, we've reached a stage now where we want to start adding some of our glowing effects. So with some pure white, I'm using AK Intense White. Add a little bit of it to your wet palette, plus a little bit of water, just one little drop of water, just to make it flow off the brush a bit easier. And just fill in the spiral on his arm. Fill that in with your white colour. Try not to don't go over the edges. Just try and fill in that central point. If you water it down a bit more, then the paint will naturally flow a lot easier in there. I'm using the Raphael 8404 series. This is a size 0, but the artifice brush is anything that's got a good sharp point will be good here. And to note, his axe, his actual cleaver, will be painting that the Nurgle symbol there and the sort of skin that's coming off of it. Exactly the same principles a bit later on, but this is right now we're just focusing on the arm and spiral, but the same principle is going to be used a bit later on his actual axe. Once the white is dry, use some Green Stuff World Fluorescent Orange Yellow mix. Notice here as well, I've just painted the white sin of his 6 eyes that are on his helmet. Now, with this fluorescent orange, yellow orange from Green Stuff World, so please, this isn't fluorescent orange, this is fluorescent orange yellow. Green Stuff World sell a sort of pre-mixed version of orange and yellow together. It's a nice colour for your start of a sort of lava effect. Paint this over all of the white in the spiral. It's like a contrast paint. It's quite thick, quite tricky to apply at first, and it starts to flow quite easily. So apply this in the spiral. Apply this also around where you've painted the sort of marks around the spiral. I'm almost glazing that over that area, as if there's some intensity of heat still coming out from the skin. So it's very gently glaze some of that, moving the paint from the outside to the inside. It's wherever you leave your paintbrush is where the most paint is going to be left. Don't worry about it not looking red yet. We'll be adding our red a little bit later. Once it's dry, it takes a few minutes to dry, like a contrast paint. The green stuff will have fluorescent red, and then add this all over the orange, and also add it into the eyes. Now the eyes we didn't paint with the orange, this is just flat red straight in, so just put the AK fluorescent red into the dots of the eye sockets, paint it all in the spiral, and then again glaze over all of the orange basically that we've done on the outside of the arm. So we're filling that whole area up with the fluorescent red, and then we're just pushing the paint from the outside to the inside of the area from his arm, going out quite far. I start adding more and more glazes of this till I'm reaching sort of maybe a 10mm, 15mm away from the spiral, as if the whole arm itself is starting to glow red with the heat. Already see now as it's drying, even as you're painting, it's getting more and more intense. I then add just a little bit, glaze it around the eyes, very very subtly around the eyes, and I also add a little bit in the joints where his antlers, as it were, attached to the helmet. Just add a little bit of this into there. But what I'm doing here is very organic. Not in how it looks, but in what I'm doing. I'm looking at the model, looking at the colours I've got on the palette, looking at where I want to add my intensities, where I want to add my glows. So that's why this clip is quite long, because I'm finding this out as I go. I know what the principles are that I want to do, that I wanted to achieve, and it's just a case of how we were going to get there, using the different ways the paints work, and that only comes with practice and, like what I'm doing here, trial and error. If this wouldn't have worked, I would have done it, tried it another way. I didn't want to use an airbrush on this. I wanted to do all brushworks. I know a few of you have asked how to do these glowing effects with just a brush, so that's what we're doing, but it does require a lot of glazing, a lot of going backwards and forwards to get the right effects at the right time and the right colours at the right time. So what I'm doing now is I'm just adding more of that red. I want the central point of the spiral to be the brightest point, so I want it to get darker as the tail of the spiral edges out. So I'm just adding more of the red towards the back of the spiral to make that darker red colour. I then grab some red ink. Now don't worry if you haven't got the red ink, you could just use sort of a red wash made out of like Mephiston red or corn red, just a dark red, but red ink is quite good for this because it's got a very dark dusty type of finish, and I'm just adding a little bit of this at the end of the tail of the spiral, just again to darken it down, so I want it almost to go to black at the end of this. So I just add a little bit of this to the edge of the spiral tail. I then start adding some of this red ink where I expected the skin to be colder, where it's got burnt, so where the heat effect has burnt the skin. I'm painting this red ink so that it darkens down those areas but turns them more red. This is our first step to really darkening down those cracked and burnt areas, almost like you would with lava, where you're darkening it down. We're doing the same with the flesh. With darkness, there is always light. So to have light, you must have dark, and to have dark, you must have light, and that's what we're going for here. Huge contrast. So I want to add some of the orange back in. It's gone very red. Now we want to bring back the orange. So the very middle of the spiral, put a little couple of dots of white, and then a few careful dots leading away. Not too much. Then a couple of little bits, there's some big little bulbuses, pustules, just pick those out as well with a little bit of white, not too much, tiny little dots here and there of where you want the intense glowing to be coming from, the core of the heat. Then we're going to use some AK Fluorescent Orange, and it's just a simple case now of painting that over where you've just added the white and a little bit of the surrounding area, so a couple of millimetres either side of where you've just done that orange. Then you'll get a natural blend from the very, very dark to the very, very light. And then what we're going to do is grab some of the Corvus Black or Tenebrous Grey, the very, very dark black grey colour. And we're now going to add a little bit of the red ink to it as well, just a little tiny little drop. And all I'm doing now is I'm just intensifying the shadows around those areas we've just made bright. Because as we said, we want contrast between dark and light, we want burnt, cracked skin. So I'm just adding now around, almost edge highlighting, but we're edge darkening. We're doing this sort of the same but reverse colours here, going against the principles of edge highlighting, edge darkening, using this black colour, almost black colour, and just making the skin look crackled and battered by this intense heat that's been coming from it. for his sort of fingernails, I just used our dark blacks and greys and just paint those in. Little lines at the end, sort of almost striations into a pure black at the base of his fingernails. So yeah, that's his skin done. So we've used a lot of different colours, but all to achieve a really nice effect. They're all blending in well together. Used all those different colours across the entirety of the skin so that they're all of the same tone. We've got some nice blending, picking out veins, picking out those really hot points, picking out the pustules, the knuckles, all with a nice intense glow. So now we're going to do exactly the same principles on his cleaver. I'll be focusing on this side of it as it's easier to film. So first off, using the white, there's the Nurgle symbol in the middle of his cleaver, picking out the recessed areas with white, and then there's some sculpted on sort of almost flayed skin, and I'm just doing little white highlights, almost lightning in a way, coming out from those three areas. And like I said, exact same principles that we painted the skin is being used when we're painting this glowing coming from the axe. So over the white we'll be putting our orange yellow mix, then once that's dry I'll be glazing over the fluorescent red from Green Stuff World, and then once that's dry bringing back the orange in the recess and then putting a little bit of fluorescent yellow in there as well, just to really make it pop, and then adding in our red inks and our Tenebrous Greys, our very dark colours, to our dark highlighting, our darkening of the highlights, and add in the sort of almost like the axe is cracked lava, and we're adding in those dark areas. If you didn't want to do this, you just paint. I think in a way you've got to do some effect on this axe because it's been sculpted onto it. You could leave the edges your metallic colours if you didn't want to do the darkening effect, but I think it sells the overall glowingness. I'm trying to go for a matching between the arm and the axe itself. Really see here when we add that fluorescent red, just the difference that it makes to the overall tone of the fluorescent yellow orange that we've added. It really intensifies it, makes it a bit dirtier, but really intensifies it, really makes it glow, even though it is technically darkening it down, but it really does make it look good. stage where I'm adding in the edge highlighting with the very, very dark colour, just to make it look like the heat has cracked and calcified all those sort of surrounding areas. And with that, Mulgoth is done, and all that's really left to paint is his base. Now I generally don't go into too much detail when I paint the base, but I added some candles to my one, So to get the glowing effect from the candles, I'm just using Violet Red, Magenta, Intense Pink and Fluorescent Rose from Green Stuff World. The rest of the paint's from AK. The Green Stuff World is the Fluorescent Magenta. There you can see I've painted both sides of the axe. I've added some Army Painter, War Painter, Scenic tufts, because it's Nurgle's Garden for my one, so I wanted to add just some little flowery tufts to the back. I've used a very dark brown over as my base coat for the base, and then dry brushed some light earth colours, some mud brown colours. I paint the base of my candles with mud brown and light earth mix, and then to get the glowing effect of the candles, I paint the wick and the inside of the candles themselves with Violet Red, then pick out a little bit more the wick and a bit of the surrounding area with Magenta. Then I paint the wick in Intense Pink, then the top of the wick with white, and then paint over quite a bit of it with the Fluorescent Rose to get a glowing magenta candle, just to add a little bit of fun to his base, to break up the monotony of the darkness of the base. So we've got then a light effects on his cleaver, the candles, and his arm moving up to the eyes, and it just helps the eye flow across the model, gives some interesting things to look at. This final step is, you don't have to do it, but I wanted the rust to really stand out. So I've got some of the AK Fluorescent Orange, and I'm adding little dots of it and to any area that I want to look really, really orange and rusty. Not too much, this is simply little dots here and there to really push the orangeness of the rust, almost to make it look like it's glowing like his arm in a way, as if that rust is almost like the filth coming from the spiral on his arm. This is optional, but I discovered this when I did the one of the Death Guard models, the guy with a massive backpack. Adding fluorescent orange to the rust just intensifies the rustiness of it, and also gives it a sort of ethereal glow as well. And yeah, then I painted the rim in black, matte black colour, and that's Mulgoth the Cleaver all done. So a fantastic sculpt. I really enjoyed this paint job. You know, an hour and a half in real time isn't too bad for a quality like this. What I have done is I just add a little bit of ultra matte varnish to his arm, not the glowing part, just the surrounding areas, just to tone down the brightness a little bit as it was a bit of a shine. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and happy painting, my fellow painters.